I have the honor and privilege now of introducing to you our other first vice president who is over action alerts for the whole state of California. This is Bonnie O'Neill, and Bonnie keeps us informed what's going on with legislation. She keeps us informed as to what really issues we should be aware of. And she has been doing this for how many years, Bonnie? About 20 years. So we would love to introduce now our MC for the afternoon program, Bonnie O'Neill.
Okay, I know that this is always difficult for everybody to eat and be at the table and to keep it quiet, but it's not just because I'm up here, but we have some of the best speakers, and one that I'm going to introduce for you right now deserves your attention, truly deserves you to be able to eat as quietly as possible and to listen as carefully as you can. Tom McClintock has been one of our treasured elected officials in California for many, many years, over 20, has 20, a few, I won't give away your age, a long time. He has been a voice for conservatives. He truly has championed many causes that we have brought to him, tax reliefs. He has been exceptional in every way. He has gone out and made speeches for us in different places trying to encourage conservative thinking. And he has now been elected to our federal government, which has been really good. We're glad to have a conservative back there. We need all that we can get. But he has so much to tell you, and I hope that you will give him all of your attention. Seriously, try to eat as quietly as possible. Tom McClintock.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. I must admit I'm feeling a little nervous to accept your very kind invitation to come here today to talk about global warming. A few years ago, no less an authority than Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. Said that those of us who still have some questions over their theories of man-made global warming are, quote, liars, crooks, corporate toadies, flat earthers, and then he made this remarkable statement: this is treason and we need to start treating them now as traitors. That's the dispassionate language of science and reason. And now I see there's an Australian political leader who's calling for us skeptics to be prosecuted as war criminals. Now, I certainly don't want to die a traitor's death, or even worse than that. I don't want to end up in some Al Gore re-education camp. So I want to make this record very clear. I believe the Earth's climate is changing and that our planet is warming. And I must tell you, this is somewhat of a sore subject with me because it was I, and not Al Gore, who discovered the theory of global climate change. And yet all you ever hear is Al Gore this and Al Gore that. My climate change discovery came way back in the fall of 1964, when Miss Conroy took our third grade class to the Museum of Natural History. And there we saw this panorama of dinosaurs stomping around the steamy swamps of what was once part of Wyoming. That panorama was right next to the exhibit of the woolly mammoths foraging on glaciers that were also once the same part of Wyoming. And I thought to myself, cool dinosaurs. And then I thought to myself, I guess it must have gotten a little chilly in Wyoming sometime between the point when it was a swamp to the point when it was a glacier. And I never got the Nobel Prize for that discovery. In fact, I later found out that Miss Conroy never even nominated me. So instead of getting to jet around the world in a fleet of Gulfstream jets to tell people they need to feel guilty about driving to work, I am relegated to having to take the Washington Metro every day at rush hour. And I do not get paid $100,000 a speech for my original discovery either. But then again, I don't have Al Gore's electricity bill, so I guess it all balances out. I mean, you do have to admit there's a certain Helmsley-esque quality to all of this. We don't conserve, only the little people conserve. Anyway, a few years after making my discovery about planetary climate change, I got to high school in the 1970s and learned from the Al Gores of that time that we foolish mortals were plunging ourselves into another ice age. Any of you from the 70s remember that one? You're sure you do. And by the way, that was also beyond dispute. All the scientists agreed. In fact, a few years ago, the Washington Times published a story about a researcher who'd stumbled upon a lurid story that had appeared in the Washington Post, dated July 9th, 1971. It included this scary headline. Listen carefully. U.S. scientist sees new ice age coming. Now, the scientists based this on a scientific climate model developed by a young research associate named James Hansen. They warned that continued carbon emissions over the next 10 years could trigger a runaway ice age. It was rather amusing because just a few months before that, old newspaper clipping surfaced. The very same James Hansen had published a paper claiming that continued carbon emissions over the next 10 years could trigger a runaway greenhouse effect. So for those in the liberal elite who jet to environmental conferences in Gulfstreams and drive around in Hummers singing the praises of hybrids and bicycles, the left now sells indulgences. You can actually calculate your carbon sins online, and they'll gladly tell you how much money to send them, all major credit cards accepted, to assuage your environmental guilt. In fact, I had a friend who paid $45 for one of these carbon offsets for his Lincoln Navigator. For $45, get this, for $45, a company will send you a very attractive 10-cent decal that certifies that your SUV now has absolutely no carbon footprint. But then my friend discovered that Priuses, which do have a carbon footprint, get to use our diamond lanes for free, while his Lincoln Navigator, which for just $45 has no carbon footprint at all, has to sit in bumper-to-bumper traffic with the rest of us carbon sinners. Now, these carbon offsets are supposed to be used for such activities as planting more trees to absorb carbon dioxide. After all, young trees absorb much more of this greenhouse gas than do old trees. But isn't replacing old-growth timber with young-growth timber exactly what lumber companies used to do until Al Gore and his friends shut them down? Now, trees are also very important to reducing energy demand. We're told that to conserve electricity, we need to plant lots of shade trees to shield our roofs from the sun so that we don't use our air conditioners. We're also supposed to install solar panels on our roofs, although they don't seem to work very well in the shade from the trees we've just planted. In fact, a few years ago, you may remember a Sunnyvale a couple was ordered to cut down the grand old redwood trees in their own backyard. Why? Their neighbor had installed solar panels in the shade of those redwoods, and the couple was informed that under state law, they'd be fined $1,000 a day if they didn't cut their redwoods down at once. Now, one word of warning. Even though you had to cut down your trees at once if a neighbor decided to install solar panels in their shadow, you are forbidden to clear flammable brush from around your home in a hazardous fire area because that's an affront to Mother Nature. Apparently, you're supposed to let it burn along with your house because this is the environmental friendly way for nature to dispose of carbon trapping vegetation, which in turn then releases lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Another important battle in the war against carbon is to force everyone to use electric cars and trains. But this also gets a little complicated because at the same time we're also supposed to be cutting back on our electricity usage to the point where the California Energy Commission now wants to require every household thermostat to have a remote control device that will allow the bureaucrats to decide what is the appropriate temperature of your living room. So you need to keep your thermostat at 90 degrees in the summer to conserve electricity, but we'll be happy to spend millions of your tax dollars for you to take an electric bullet train from LA to San Francisco for the weekend. In fact, there are only two ways of generating vast amounts of clean electricity for electric cars and trains: hydroelectricity and nuclear power. But there is no faster way to send these Luddites into hysterics than to mention to them that inconvenient truth. The politically correct replacement is solar energy. Solar energy is roughly 17 times more expensive than either nuclear power or hydroelectricity, which of course means 17 times less electricity to run electric cars and electric trains. So energy conservation then is the answer for all of us little people, which is why we're required only to use energy-efficient fluorescent lights nowadays rather than those warm and fuzzy incandescent bulbs. But wait, we've banned the disposal of fluorescent lights in our trash because of the extreme environmental hazard they pose in our landfills. So I got to tell you, I approached this subject this afternoon with an admitted level of sheer confusion over what in the world these people are thinking. Let me merely pose three inconvenient questions. First, if global warming is caused by your SUV, why is it that we are seeing global warming on every other body in the solar system? I mean, for the last decade or so, the Martian South Polar ice cap has conspicuously receded. Pluto's warming about 2 degrees Celsius over the past 14 years. Jupiter's showing dramatic climate change by as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit. If you have any doubt of that, just Google Mars warming or Pluto warming or whatever your favorite planet or former planet might be. Meanwhile, solar radiation's increased a small but measurable 0.05% since the 1970s. Now, I'm just thinking out loud here, but do you think it's just maybe possible that as the sun gets slightly warmer, the planets do as well? And by the way, if you've been following the latest science on the subject, it's now appearing very likely because of a diminution of solar activity and solar spots that we're actually seeing the sun now move into a less active 11-year cycle. Second inconvenient question. If global warming is caused by your SUV, why is it that we have ample historical records of periods in our recent history when the planet's temperature was much warmer than it is today? I mean, during the medieval warm period from about 900 to 1300 AD, we know that wine grapes were thriving in northern Britain and Newfoundland, and the temperature in Greenland was hot enough to support a prosperous agricultural economy for nearly 500 years. That's why they called it Greenland. That period was brought to an end by the Little Ice Age that lasted from 1300 to about 1850. We know that during colonial times, Boston and New York harbors routinely froze over in winter. And during Elizabethan times, an annual winter festival was held on the top of the Thames River, which froze solid every year. And finally, the third inconvenient question. If global warming is caused by your SUV, why is it that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide always follow increases in global temperatures by several hundred years? Again, I'm just thinking aloud here, but is it possible that if CO2 increases follow temperature changes, that might possibly mean that increased CO2 is a byproduct of increasing temperatures, not a cause of increasing temperatures? Now, I am sure that Al Gore must have an answer to these and all of the other questions that have been raised by us treasonous, corporate toady, Holocaust-denying war criminals. I mean, you've seen The Inconvenient Truth, haven't you? I mean, in it, Al Gore portrays himself as a tireless, lonely sentinel who should have been president, of course, wandering the planet, trying desperately to awaken the world to the danger that it faces. I've given this speech 1,000 times, he says, about 1,000 times. So I cannot wait for him to accept the now 4-year-old invitation from the Heartland Institute for an international debate on the subject. I'm absolutely certain that this pious paragon of truth, who assures us he's willing to go anywhere and talk to anybody to save us from our mortal folly, should be chafing at the bit to show us the error of our ways. Now, as I understand it, the Heartland Institute has offered our Nobel Peace Prize laureate of the left to debate any one of 3 internationally recognized authorities of his choice, and that they'll front all costs at Oxford University, no less, and in a format of Gore's own choosing. After all, Gore's book extols the importance of science and reason in the public policy debate, so what better way to deliver the coup de grace to us skeptics than to expose our fallacies in front of an international audience? And yet, Al Gore, who's given his speech 1,000 times, he says, won't give it just once more in a form where it might actually be questioned by knowledgeable authority. In a sense, though, we've had that debate in the British court several years ago. The High Court of Great Britain determined that there were no less than 11 provable factual errors on key scientific points in that film, and they ordered that a disclaimer to that effect had to be made in any public classroom where the film was shown, which may, by the way, be the reason why the global warming grant machine is constantly being caught falsifying data. I don't know if you saw the Drudge Report today, but there's another case where they put their thumb on the scale, this case on rising sea levels. But you've asked me to address a serious and grim subject, and that is the actual threat that global warming poses to our planet, and most specifically, the threat it poses to California. And that threat is very real, and it is devastating. And the threat I'm speaking of are the radical policies that these global warmongers are now enacting. As you know, in the summer of 2006, in the name of saving the planet from global warming, California adopted the most radically restrictive legislation anywhere on the planet, including AB 32, which requires a 25% reduction in man-made carbon dioxide emissions by 2020. Now, to put this in perspective, we could junk every car in the state of California right now and not meet the mandate. At about the same time, the same politicians who adopted these measures also adopted $40 billion of bonds that they promised would be used for things like highways, dams, aqueducts, and other capital improvements. Now, here's the problem. Building highways, dams, aqueducts, and other capital improvements requires tremendous amounts of cement. Now, how is cement produced? It's produced by taking limestone and superheating it into a molten state. It comes out the other side as a compound called clinker. Clinker is about 2/3 the weight of the original limestone. Guess what the missing 1/3 of that weight is? Carbon dioxide. And when you include the emissions required to superheat the limestone, it turns out that for every ton of cement, a ton of carbon dioxide is released. It is the 3rd biggest source of carbon dioxide in all human enterprise. But now we have a law that specifically forbids us from doing so. So say goodbye to construction. Agriculture is in big trouble too. You can start with nitrogen fertilizer, which is a critical component of all agricultural activity. Unfortunately, making the stuff produces large amounts of nitrous oxide, another of the so-called greenhouse gases that have to be radically altered in California. The wine industry is also in for a hell of a shock. Fermentation of wine occurs when a molecule of glucose in the grape, remember chemistry? Take a molecule of glucose in the grape, turn it into equal parts of ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. The biggest agricultural impacts, the mandate for the heavily subsidized use of ethanol fuel. Ethanol is produced in exactly the same way as alcohol is in wine. The glucose in the corn is converted into equal parts of ethyl alcohol, ethanol, and carbon dioxide. Following AB 32, the state has imposed a requirement that all gasoline sold in California must be comprised of at least 10% ethanol. Now, anybody have a pocket calculator here? Pull it out. We're going to have a little fun with math. 1 acre of corn produces 350 gallons of ethanol. There are 15 billion gallons of gasoline used in California every year. So in order to meet the 10% requirement in 3 years, it means converting 4.3 million acres of farmland to ethanol production. Now, that's a lot of farmland, 4.3 million acres, considering we have a total of 11 million acres of producing any kind of crops in California. The current ethanol mandates are already producing serious shortages in other parts of the world as farmland that had been producing food shifts to ethanol to chase billions of dollars of government subsidies coming out of your pocket. So, higher taxes, higher food prices, higher gasoline prices, what's not to like? And we're seeing this across the board, including commodities like milk and beef that are responding to increased prices for corn feed. As you see your grocery prices rise as a result of this policy, just be glad you're not in the third world. Food's a relatively small portion of the family incomes of affluent nations, but it consumes more than half of family income in third world countries. So when the global warming alarmists predict worldwide starvation, they're right. They're creating it. Electricity prices are also taking a heavy hit. California already suffers the highest electricity prices in the continental United States. We, by the way, also have the lowest per capita electricity consumption, not only of any state in the country. California's per capita electricity consumption is now lower than Guam and Aruba. And yet that situation is about to worsen still. A companion measure to AB 32 was SB 1368 that prohibits the importation of electricity produced by coal. Even state-of-the-art plants thousands of miles from California that meet all of the EPA's requirements. Truckee became the first victim of this law. Truckee was about to sign a 50-year contract for electricity produced by a new coal-fired plant in Utah. They were forced to back off because of this legislation. The original contract that they were about to sign was for $35 per megawatt hour. The so-called green replacement power will cost Truckee consumers $65 per megawatt hour. The radical laws now in place in California are having a dramatic impact on energy production, agriculture, manufacturing, winemaking and construction, cargo transportation, just to name a few sectors of our economy. And we're already seeing the economic impact in California. Until last year, California's unemployment rate tracked with the national figures, within a tenth of a point or so. But since the autumn of 2006, California's unemployment rate has begun a radical divergence from the national figures. It's now in double digits, more than 25% higher than the national unemployment rate. So you can't blame the national economic recession for California's much higher state unemployment numbers. You have to look for something peculiar that occurred in California and specific to California in the autumn of 2006. And I would submit to you the most significant thing that happened was the adoption of AB 32. There's one other thing that strikes me on this issue, and that's how puny is the amount of carbon dioxide produced by human enterprise compared to simple natural processes. The AB 32 mandate is to reduce man-made carbon dioxide emissions by 170 million metric tons per year. That's what all this tremendous economic dislocation is about, 170 million metric tons. Now, let me mention one other man-made source of carbon dioxide that they don't like to count or talk about. Every person in this room today is going to produce 2.2 pounds of carbon dioxide by willfully, deliberately breathing. That's 800 pounds of carbon dioxide that you're going to produce by breathing a year. Now keep your calculators out and stay with me on this. There are 6.6 billion of us on this planet. That comes to 5.3 trillion pounds, or 2.4 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide simply through the process of breathing. And that's before you count in all of the cats and rats and elephants out there that are doing exactly the same thing. So, there are 2.4 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions worldwide through human breathing. 2.4 billion tons. And 170 million tons is what all the fuss is about in California. I was struck by Arnold Schwarzenegger's speech to the United Nations as he was imposing this lunacy. He told them, "Do I believe California's standards will solve global warming? No. What we're doing is changing the dynamic, preparing the way, and encouraging the future." So even the individual most responsible for this economically catastrophic public policy admits this is not going to solve global warming. He just wants to set an example. Well, in that singular respect, I think he's succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Not only have the promises of the left for a new era of green jobs failed to materialize, the impact of these restrictions on California's economy has been nothing short of catastrophic. As the unemployment rate has skyrocketed since the enactment of AB 32, Californians are clawing their way to escape our new environmental paradise, and the state's revenues have imploded. In fact, the Census Bureau tells us in the last 5 years, nearly 1 million more people have fled California than have moved into California domestically. So as California's economy continues to disintegrate, I think we're going to see Americans rapidly coming to the conclusion that this just isn't exactly the brightest public policy to pursue. You know, in normal times, people don't pay a lot of attention to public policy. That's why democracies occasionally drift off course. But when a crisis approaches, that's when you see the strength of a democracy emerge. One by one, citizens sense the approach of a common danger and they rise to the occasion. They focus, they look beyond the symbols and the rhetoric, and they start making very good decisions. Political majorities can shift very quickly in such times. Polls can reverse themselves almost overnight in such times. I think we've just come through an election that has proven this point. We are undertaking a vast national debate right now over the future of our country, and that debate is not occurring inside of Capitol buildings. It's occurring outside of Capitol buildings among the American people. It's occurring over backyard fences and family dinner tables and coffee at Starbucks, and it is upon the outcome of that great debate among the American people that the future of our nation will be decided. And if I could ask one thing of you, I know that a lot of attention has been directed at the UN and their, what we call it, Agenda 21. I have learned over the years never to ascribe to malice and conspiracy what can be more easily explained by stupidity and public folly. The policies, the great policy debate is over these specific policies. And the more the people see of these specific policies, the more they're going to conclude that their government has been taken over sometime when they weren't paying close attention to it, not by some evil conspiracy, international conspiracy, but rather the public policy has simply been taken over by what I can only describe as the lunatic fringe of our society. And the more we make the case on these public policies, the more you are going to see the American public coming to that conclusion. By going off on these rabbit trails of international conspiracies, you're missing the main point. The main point is these policies are bad public policy. They need to be defeated on their merits. And if you defeat the public policy, you'll defeat the policymakers, whoever they are. So I'd urge you, please, talk about these policies and the lunacy behind them. Don't go off on rabbit trails, because it's on those issues that the American people will save our government. Thank you all very much.
We so appreciate Congressman Tom McClintock being with us, and he was actually honored by Eagle Forum of California when he was a state legislator as our Legislator of the Year, and now we are so proud and honored to also present a plaque to him as our Congressman of the Year. Beautiful. And we also have another wonderful gift. This is our secretary from Sonoma County Eagle Forum, Dorothy DeMar, 2 bottles of wine from Sonoma County, and also an amazing plaque that explains what happened when well, you come and explain it, Dorothy. She was there. This is a historical moment in aviation.
I was blessed to be a part of the Fred J. Wiseman first airmail flight celebration. It was a 100-year centennial, and the actual flight took place from Petaluma to Santa Rosa on February 17th and 18th, 1911. So they had a reenactment, and they produced these wines. There's also a poster, and I was in the chase plane following the biplane reenacting it. So I just wanted Congressman McClintock to have this as a little gift of Northern California adventures.
Thank you. And we have one more gift. Congressman McClintock, you have the distinct honor of receiving my huge, humongous book, 700 pages, and also my book on Just Say No to Big Brother's Smart Meter.